Hey guys, this is Eli from MOBOX. It has been a while again, but this time we'll go over all the steps to create this miniature basketball court. I will be going a bit faster on the basics as usual, so if you're really new to this, I recommend trying out one of the older tutorials of us. So let's get started. It is possible to draw the court outlines in Illustrator, for example, and just put it as a texture on a plane. But we're going to stick with Cinema 4D just for the sake of it. I can see some benefits if we make an animation, for example. So let's go in our top view and press Shift and V to open our viewport options, and then set up a background reference image with a lowered transparency. We will be using spline shapes to draw the lines on the court. In the long run, for larger scenes like this one, it is easier to stick with round numbers and no decimals. So at the right side, let's go to Mode and Modeling, and then let's enable Quantize. Now we're going to set this to 1 centimeter, which means that things will snap to a 1 centimeter grid. You can also make splines editable to move the points around more easily. The circle shape will also snap because of the quantizing we enabled. The small individual lines are most easily drawn with the pen tool. They should snap on an invisible grid as well. And after you've drawn the second point, just hit Escape to end the spline. Now select the object while also using the object mode and just duplicate it to the other spots while holding Ctrl or Command and just dragging it down there. For the large round shape, we can start with a rectangle shape that has similar dimensions and make it editable, and then we can select the 2 corner points, right click and pick chamfer and drag it all the way until we get a half circle. After all of this is done, you can select all the individual pieces and duplicate them to the other side. And finally, we just need to draw that middle line with the pen tool. Now we have to turn these into actual solid objects. We can start off by selecting all splines that are not closed shapes. So in this case, just the small lines and the middle line. Group them together in a null and put that inside of a connect object. This will treat all pieces as one object now. We're doing that because we can now put this inside a sweep object together with a rectangle, while all small pieces still get recognized by the sweep. 4 centimeters for the rectangle should look good, but let's check it out in the 3D view. In this case, we have to change the orientation to ZY to get it laying flat. Also, don't forget to set the other dimension to 0, so we don't have any thickness to this. We don't need that. Now we can turn all the remaining splines into sweeps in a similar way, but they unfortunately need to be done individually to avoid glitches and gaps. I'm not sure why it happens. So once you've set up the first sweep and got the rectangle, its orientation right, you can just copy that one and work your way through the list. Let's group all of that together and see how this looks when we put a floor in the scene. We're also going to give the lines a material so you can easily see the difference, of course. So in this case it looks fine, but maybe some parts are being cut off on your screen. That's because both the lines and the floor are on the same level, so you can work around that by just elevating the lines the tiniest bit. And there's one more thing you should already prepare for, and that's unwanted shadows these lines will be casting, because they're just a bit higher up there. So if I add a light in the scene, you'll see the tiniest shadow next to it. Luckily, this is easy to work around. Just right click on the lines group, go to Cinema 4D tags and pick the compositing tag. In there you can disable cast shadows, and you also want to disable scene by ambient occlusion, because that will also give some fake shadows. Okay, let's remove everything for now except for the lines. This was just to show you how it works. Let's continue with the rings. For the pole itself, you could start off with a cube, but doing it with a sweep gives more control in my opinion. So go in the top view and draw just one point with the pen tool. Because we are in the top view, it will always put that point at 0 height, which is nice. Now back in the 3D view, you can duplicate this point while holding Ctrl or Command and moving it up. Let's repeat that a few more times to get that angle that can connect with the backboard of the ring. It doesn't have to be right straight away, because you can move these points around, of course. Okay, when that is done, we can now create the rectangle again, maybe 6 centimeters in size this time, and then put them both in a sweep object. The backboard itself can be a simple cube. You can copy my dimensions if you want to. They are roughly the same size as the reference image, or at least from the top view. For For the actual ring itself, we can use a torus object. And to connect that with the backboard, we're going to use a very small cylinder inside of a symmetry object. So we get two of them nicely mirrored from the center. Just make sure you put in the right mirror plane orientation, XZ in this case. Let's also put some more detail to the backboard itself by making it editable. Select the front polygon and maybe also the one at the back. Make a small inner extrusion of 2 cm and just make a small second inner extrusion at the front and try scaling it to something that looks right for that small frame above the ring. And then finally make one more inner extrusion of also 2 cm to get the outline. One more thing that is missing right now is the net below the ring. So let's start with a cylinder. Under the cap step you can disable the top and the bottom because the ball has to go through, of course. And now we're going to deform this shape. But we need a bit more segments in the height for this to work, and just 12 rotation segments will do. With the cylinder still selected, add a taper deformer while holding shift. That will make it a child with the right size and all that instantly. With the strength value we can control the effect, but it looks like we need to rotate the deformer 180 degrees first, so it looks right. Let's also get rid of any curvature because it kind of bloats the shape right now, but we want it to go the opposite way. Unfortunately, we can go minus 100% for some reason, so we'll have to add a second deformer, which can be the bulge deformer. So we're going to do that while holding shift again, and you may also want to put it beneath the taper deformer, so it happens as a second one. In here we can set a small negative value now. Great, so that's the base shape, but not exactly a net just yet. We could make actual geometry for this, but because it's a miniature, it is a bit of overkill, so we're just going to stick with a texture. So create a new material and enable the alpha channel. In here, add a texture, which can be surface bricks. Go inside of there, and we're going to try to make these square and not have them shift every half brick. We're also going to change all the colors to just pure white and black, as it should be on alpha textures. For the rest, you can try copying the values I'm entering right now, or try some stuff of your own. So for me it looks like I put the colors the wrong way, so I can just hit the invert button here on the alpha channel. But it still looks a bit rough for me, and that appears to be the size variation that should be set at 0%. Alright, so that's good. Let's finish this piece by just adding a small foot base at the bottom of the pole. Just a flat cube will do. Let's use this cube as the axis center for the whole ring. So group just the cube as a null first, and then put the rest in. Now we can create an instance of this and move it to the other side of the chord. And the benefit of using an instance instead of copying it is that we can just edit the original ring if needed, and then the other ring will also get adjusted automatically. Okay, now may be a good time to add an actual floor in this scene. I'll be using a cube, so we have a bit of thickness to it as well. What I'm trying to achieve here is having it at an uniform scale from the lines of the chord. So I'm going with 80 centimeters extra, and I start counting from the center of the white lines. Of course we can adjust the spacing a bit later. Let's also put a basketball on top of here, now we're at it. So that's just a simple sphere. And to make it look like a basketball in this miniature scene again, I'm not going to mess around with geometry, I'm just going to use a texture again. You can find some free ones on Google by just searching for 3D basketball texture. It has to be this kind of 3D one, so it wraps around nicely. The one from OpenGameArt, which is the first hit in my case, is just right for now. Cool. Next I'm going to block out the basic shapes of the stair set in the back. There are plugins for this, but you know I like to keep it 100 and stick with what we've got. So I'm going to use cubes of 80 centimeters on all sides. And in the top view, starting with its corner exactly at the corner of our chord lines, and then moving it up 80 centimeters. It could be anything, but I like going with this bit of uniformity. So that's the corner piece. Get a second one next to it, and let's make it a bit longer, so it isn't as steep of a staircase. So let's add maybe half of the size, so that's 120 centimeters in total. Now make this one editable, and we're going to move the top corner edge down all the way to the floor. To get the axis to line up straight, you will also have to enable the world axis button at the top here. Now we can duplicate the shape to continue the stair at the top. I'm also going to add one more cube where the staircase ends. Next up, let's add the big wall next to the stairs. You can start off with a duplicate of the cube and just make it editable and move the polygons to get the right dimensions more easily. You may also want to do the same thing with the floor, so it nicely lines up. I also had some details on this wall. There are multiple ways to do this, but let's go with the fastest one. With the cube selected and in the edge mode, right click and pick the loop cut tool. Make a vertical cut anywhere on the front and then set the number of cuts to 4. They'll get a nice even distance straight away. Before leaving, also check the select cuts option, because now if we right click and swap to the bevel tool, we still have these selected. Set the mode to solid in here, and we're going to increase the size until the lines end up somewhere close to the stairs for aesthetics sake. If you didn't follow the exact dimensions, it doesn't really matter, it's just something that looks nice. Now let's switch to the polygon mode and select the largest polygons at the front. Move these forward, something like 8 centimeters maybe, while holding Ctrl or Command, so it is an actual extrusion of the polygons. But now the shape is a bit more extended, of course, so we need to push the whole object back 8 centimeters and also compensate the polygons at the back, so move them in 8 centimeters again. I also noticed we were missing a piece at the back here, so under the stairs, so let's just extend the cube to fill this up. Now let's continue adding details to the stairs. So we can use a cube with the same width as the placeholder cube, maybe 8 by 8 on the other directions. Put that inside of a cloner and make it move up forward 8 centimeters every step. So when we line this up and add more clones, you can see it goes in a perfect 45-degree angle. But our staircase isn't that steep, so let's lower the height per step and adjust the count of clones until things start lining up. You can also click and drag the endpoint here to quickly get things in place or just get the first estimate of the number. In this case, it looks like we'll have to go with a decimal number for now, because we're dividing the length by 15 steps or clones. Cool, so we should be able to just duplicate this one now and put it on top of the other placeholder. Good, so now I think it would be a good idea to add some handrails at the top of the wall and also next to the stairs. In preparation for that, I'm going to select the big wall and press Shift and C so I can type in center axis 2 and hit enter. Because of that, I can now create a rectangle spline while holding Ctrl or Command, so it gets created on that center of the cube. Make sure the cube was also selected, of course. So now it is easier to adjust the size of the rectangle and have it nicely lined up from the center. I'm also going to add 5 centimeters of rounding at the corners, so that looks nice. And next we can put it inside the sweep with a circle again. Scale down the circle, of course, and maybe you also want to adjust the settings a bit so it doesn't have as many subdivisions, because it is a bit too much right now. This one doesn't look so stable right now, so just adding a cylinder will do. You can create it while holding Ctrl or Command again, so it centers to the current selection. Put it inside of a cloner, and maybe we can use the grid array mode this time. They only need to go in one direction, so the other values can stay at 1. Let's roughly drag the endpoint handle so it overlaps the current end of the handrail, and then round the number to be more precise. Now if we change the mode from endpoint to per step, we can just remove 2 clones so it doesn't overlap at the ends anymore. Okay, now for the handrails on the stairs, it is slightly different with the angle. I'm going to use the pen tool and draw a first point in the top view, just on top of the first step. Then I'll just hit escape so we can duplicate that point in the side view. Let's stick with 38 centimeters in height or something close to that. Now we can duplicate this point to the side, make sure it lines up with the center of the step, and then move it up 38 centimeters again, or whatever you picked on the first one. And finally, get that last duplicate to the side. It can stay floating because it will connect to a wall. I'm also going to select this one sharp corner point, so right click and add a chamfer to this. We're using 5 centimeters like we did on the corners at the other rail. We can put this inside of a sweep together with a circle again, with lower subdivisions like we did on the other one. Let's get a cylinder again. We can put the first one manually at the top step already. And then preferably put it inside of a cloner again. Just 2 clones will do. And the X distance can be something like 42 centimeters, which kind of looks right for me. We're going to copy this cloner and move it to the bottom of the stairs. This time we need some step size on the Y value again. And in the side view we can count the number of stairs to make things even. So a step size of 30 centimeters on the X value seems right enough for now. Okay, so that's all set up. Now let's continue with the wall I was talking about earlier. Starting off with a flat cube, you can copy my dimensions, put that inside of a cloner again with grid array mode. We're going to use 5 of these panels on the Z-axis, and I'm going to guess the endpoint value just for now. So then we can line up the wall on one side and go check how much it overlaps on the other. The way I do this is just by dragging the other cube until it lines up and looking at the amount of centimeters I moved it. So for me that's 20 centimeters I need to shave off, and then centering the whole thing again, of course. Okay, I'm going to fill in the gaps at the back with a duplicate of this cloner, but with just 4 panels this time. And I'm just going to guess the endpoint on this one. It doesn't have to be that precise. Maybe also extend the floor a bit so we don't have the void below the second row of panels. Next part we are going to add are the lampposts. These are just cylinders with a taper deformer, so the top is a bit smaller than the bottom. I'm also adding a smaller cylinder at the top and adding a fillet on the caps with very few subdivisions. Or you can use many of them if you want to. And lastly, put a sphere on top of there. I'm grouping all of this together so we can put this inside of a symmetry object. That way we can mirror it to both sides. And now I'm going to add this symmetry object into another symmetry object and change the orientation so we can mirror it to the front and the back of the scene. Pretty simple stuff once you're in the flow of it. Our next object is going to be a small bench. We're building this up from smaller planks, so that's a flat cube again. You can copy my dimensions, put that in a cloner, set it to 4 clones, and adjust the Z step size so we get small gaps in between them. Then I'm going to add small cubes that will be the legs, and also thinner cross beams in between, so that they're all just simple cubes. Let's then group all of the leg parts together and put it as an instance to the other side, or you can just copy and paste them if you want to. Okay, now group the whole bench together, so we can put it inside of a symmetry object again and have 2 benches next to both lampposts. You can also use the instance method again to keep things lightweight. Cool, so we're slowly getting there. Our next point of focus is going to be the shrubs or the bushes that are hanging from the walls. How I made these is putting a bunch of spheres on there to roughly sketch out the shape of the bushes. Once that is done, add a volume builder, which is inside of a volume measure, that's always the same thing, and add all the spheres inside of the volume builder. You should notice the spheres turn into a larger blob, but we're also losing some detail. So let's set the voxel size to 5 centimeters for example, but don't go too small without saving your file first, because things may get a bit unstable if you do so. So this is looking a bit too defined right now maybe, but we can fix that by adding a reshape layer on top of the spheres, so that makes it a bit thicker. Clicking on that layer inside of here also gives us some options to decrease the strength of that effect. But another thing we can do is decreasing the voxel range threshold on the volume measure. Basically a lot of values you can experiment with. Great, let's put that volume measure inside of a null so I can put it together with a displacer deformer. I'm already going to decrease the height of this to 5 centimeters. And of course we need to add a noise or anything in the shading tab to actually see things happen. But this noise, its global scale should be a lot smaller. You can also increase the contrast down here to make the effect more dramatic, which is what we want in this case. Perfect, so that's all that. Now we just need some final small details, for example, the grass. I'm starting with a very small plane, just 1 width segment, 20 height segments so we can deform it nicely, and get a taper deformer as a child of it with 100% of strength. Then add a bend deformer as a second child. This way you can just drag that top handle of the bend deformer to create some variations. So make a bunch of copies of this plane and adjust the bend deformer until you get a nice chunk of grass. Also remember, you can adjust the size of the plane to get even more variation. Once you're satisfied with the result, you can group this all together and make a copy of it and hide the original object as the backup. Right click on this new copy and select all the children, then right click again and we can connect all objects plus delete. So this gets merged into one solid object without having to calculate the deformers every time. One more thing we need to adjust is the axis on this object. So go in the axis mode by pressing L on the keyboard, and preferably in the front view you can put it at the bottom here of this object. When you're done, don't forget to disable the axis mode, of course. You could use a cloner to get many of these, but I'm just going to manually place instances of this, maybe in a render instance mode to make it even more lightweight. Up here in the corner next to the stairs, it looks a bit repetitive on my end. So let's select some random pieces and switch to the object mode up here. That enables us to rescale instances. Then go in the scale tool, but make sure you go in the settings of that scale tool and turn on the per object manipulation. But also make sure to disable it once you're done, because otherwise when you start rotating and moving things around, it will behave very strangely. Okay, almost there now. It's nice to have some plants and boxes in front of the walls at the right here. So start off with a slightly flattened cube, make it editable so we can select the top polygon and use the inner extrude tool. Then sink down that middle polygon by holding Ctrl or Command while moving it down. And now we can select all edges that are on corners and use the bevel tool to add a small amount of rounding to it. I'm also putting some of these grass pieces in here already. And now let's get the plant going. In the front view, draw one point with the pen tool again and center it to the scene by giving it a 0 cm value on all axes. Then create a duplicate of that point above it. You can go to something close to 100 to 125 centimeters. Now I would like to curve this spline. You usually get some of these handles to make curves if you select both points, right click and set a soft interpolation, but it doesn't always work on just 2 points. So my workaround is adding a third point by control clicking the middle of the spline and then selecting all 3 points and adding that soft interpolation again. Now you can even delete that center one and just keep the handle at the top. I'm even going to make the bottom point a hard interpolation again. Great, so now you can make duplicates of the spline object and get small variations. Also try rotating the whole object itself so it doesn't look too flat. Once you're done with that, put all of these inside of a connect object. That way we can put this inside of a sweep object again, together with a circle spline to get some volume to it. You can also put this inside of the plant box now. A last thing we need, of course, are some of these leaves. I'm not going for the super detailed look, but just enough to be convincing. So let's search back for that backup grass piece we kept earlier. Go in the top view and rotate it so it lays flat. And now we can start adjusting this by rotating these around a bit, so we get pieces pointing in all directions. It can be quite rough. Once done, you can select all children and merge this into one solid object again. Put this piece inside of a cloner and set it to render instance already, because we will be adding a lot of them. The mode has to be set to object, and we can try adding the whole branches sweep as the object for now. And that kind of looks good, but if we start adding more of them, it starts looking weird. So we're going to use a different approach to this, where we will be using placeholders. So you can use spheres again to block out the zones where reliefs may appear. Merge all spheres together again if you want to, and set it as the object for the cloner. Then obviously we want to hide this placeholder from the viewport and the render by clicking the 2 dots until they turn red. And if you're not liking it just yet, you can start adjusting the spheres if you want to, or just change the seed of the cloner. Perfect. So group all of this together again and make 2 more instances of it to put it in front of the wall panels. Also rotate the boxes 90 degrees maybe, so they don't look as identical. The very last thing we'll be adding to the scene are some small rocks or pebbles. It always breaks things up nicely. You can use any shape you like. I'm going with a small platonic object. Put that inside of a cloner again. Render instance. Let's also use a placeholder again. So just a simple plane or polygon that resembles the spots where we want rocks. If you use multiple spots, merge them together again, of course. Now we can set the cloner to object mode and point it to these placeholders, which we can also make invisible again. So I'm adding a whole bunch of them, but let's get more variation with the random effector. It doesn't have to move too much because we already have random placement on the surface, but the scale can have some more variation though, and same goes for the rotation. I'm also going to select the cloner again and get a second random effector, just to get more variation in the uniform scale. Alright, so we're all set up now. Let's wrap things up by adding a long zoom lens to get a miniature look. For the lighting, I usually add the ambient occlusion effect in the render settings. As usual, I also get a physical sky. I set the time to be somewhere in the afternoon during springtime for now. The shadows are pointing from the left to the right in my scene, but I want to manipulate that, so you can just rotate the whole physical sky object to do that. I'll enable the interactive render region so you can see what is happening from here. So let's go to the sun settings of our sky. For me it can be stronger. I'm also going to add a custom sun color, so enable that. And instead of that blue hue, I'll be going with a strong orange one. To complement that, I'm also going to set the shadow to be a dark blue instead of just black. Right now things look a bit weird, but we'll compensate that by adding an environment object with about 70% strength. If you want, you can also play with the color of it to make things look a tiny bit cooler or warmer. I'm also adding an omnilight at the front corner of the scene to brighten things up a bit with a blue shade, but we also need to decrease the intensity so we don't overcompensate, of course. Okay, so that's all for the lighting. It is the most fun part to play around with, so I'd say try something of your own. Now I'll be going over some of the more detailed materials, and all the other ones are just simple colors, so I'll skip those. So for the concrete floor I picked up a grey color and added a noise texture for the bump channel. It doesn't have to be too strong, but the scale has to be way smaller than it is by default. For the spheres of the lamp I'm adding some orange luminance to it, but not at 100% intensity. Then I'm also adding some glow to it with 100% outer strength instead of a 500. Then for the bushes or shrubs on the wall, I obviously went with a green color, but also adjusted the specular channel quite a bit. I wanted the light reflection to be sharper and larger, but it also should be green instead of white, so I went with a lime green color. So you can see that happening at the top of the bushes, which looks nice in these lighting conditions. For the other materials, I'm just going to show you the colors on screen now, if you want them to be the same on your end. Alright, so with that, every part of the scene is being covered. If you want to take a look at the original project files, you can find those on our Patreon page, together with all the previous ones. Also, feel free to share your own end results with us on Instagram, so we can take a look at them. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.